Hello, and welcome to another episode of Balanced Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Brennen Burkhart is a rancher and co-owner of HTTL Farms, a small family farm located in central Nevada. According to the Burkharts, it is in the middle of nowhere and they absolutely love it. It is a joint venture between the Burkhart and Jolley families. The Burkhart family, including Brennan's wife Joanna and their 4 children, have been in that valley since 2017, where all but one of their children has been born. Their goal is to build the business so that the Jolley family can eventually join the Burkharts to live and work the land together. The farm consists of 180 acres of pasture and about 150 cows. They do not own a tractor and they do not raise cash crops, both conscious decisions as they strive to do their best to be good stewards of the land. Brennan and his family care for the soil and recognize it as the foundation for good human and planetary health. They strive to cultivate biodiversity by raising a wide variety of different grasses on that soil, also known as polyculture. Their cattle consume those grasses directly from the field and return the fertilizer to the soil. HTTL Farms keeps things simple and believes that simple is best. Brennen Burkhart, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Balanced Body Radio.
I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited.
Absolutely. It's so cool to talk to you. I actually met you in person 2 weeks ago. I have the best neighbors, man. My neighbors, like, they know me and they help me not miss things that are going on in the neighborhood. And your mom also lives in the neighborhood, which I was unaware of her and that she had lived here. But she had posted something about you guys coming up and bringing some beef to try. And one of my friends, former client, tagged me in the thing, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, yes, I want to go to this meet and greet and want to come meet you and talk to ranchers and try your beef. And man, it was so much fun. It was so great to talk to you. And the food was absolutely delicious. And I thought, what a great person to have on this show. We've never actually talked to a rancher. So we're so grateful for you and all of your work.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It was great to meet you. I feel like it was a good chain of events that made that happen. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think so too. And from what I understand, I don't think you've been in the beef industry for very long, only a few years. So how many times have you tried to do that, where you've like gone to another place to try to sell your beef? I feel like that was a pretty successful visit for you guys.
Yeah, it was very successful, and it was the most successful we've ever had. That's because it was the first one we've ever done. So
Oh, nice. I hope you'll be doing more of them.
yeah, we plan to. We're going to try to do another one in Utah before the end of the year. So
Yeah, awesome. Oh, that's great. It's really kind of unfortunate around here. We have a farmers market that comes to our neighborhood in particular, the Daybreak area of South Jordan. As you know, it's not like the biggest area, and it's not going to attract a lot of like the big farms and big producers. But it's really disappointing. I would say probably 60 different booths there. There might be, I don't know, 5 or 6 that sell any kind of food, and there's
yeah,
none that actually sell beef. There's a few that sell like their fruits and vegetables and whatever they're harvesting, but it's really kind of tough to make relationships with ranchers, with farmers, with the people that are producing our food. And I just think that's such a missed area that we could be doing a lot better job of.
sure. Yeah, no, there's really not a lot of people doing, farming and ranching anymore, and so the opportunity to interact and meet with those people is getting smaller and smaller, I think. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
interesting. I'm surprised they don't have beef though at that farmers market. That really surprises me.
I know you're more likely to come home with like a hand painted coffee mug than you are to come home with any kind of food, from fruits or vegetables or meat or anything. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's not much of a farmer's market, which is fine. They're cool coffee mugs. I just wish there was more food there, more farmers.
Yeah,
Oh man. Well, we are recording this. It looks like you are outside on your farm property, which is absolutely beautiful. The pictures are marvelous. You look completely isolated out there. Like we said in the introduction, it might be in the middle of nowhere. I would love to hear your story about ranching. This is not something that you grew up doing, as far as I understand it correctly. Is that right?
correct. Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs, um, in Texas actually, and where we lived, it was kind of on the edge of development, and so there was still some farmland and pasture land, but most of that was being built up, bought up and built up. And one of my first jobs, actually, while I was still in high school, was working construction, and I learned some good skills there. But one of the things I started to notice is that we were building up on these, pastures and timberland, and after a while, that started to bother me because I realized that I really enjoy being in those types of places, and what I was doing was directly contributing to the loss of those kind of places.
Wow.
And so I had kind of a conundrum there, to reconcile. And I got to the point where I decided that instead of working to take away those kind of places, I wanted to actively be a part of building those places. And I think I was about 18 or 19 when I decided that. And then, just set my mind to it, and was able to meet my wife, who grew up doing this kind of stuff, and she's been a huge help, to kind of guide me along the path to get to where we are today.
Yeah. How did the two of you meet?
So we met in college. She was actually a teacher's assistant in a livestock handling course, and I always tease her, but this is true. But I saw her working cows, and I thought, man, she looks good doing that, and
That's awesome.
decided I wanted to meet her, and I was sure she was married or had a boyfriend or something, but I thought I'll never find out until I ask, and I asked, and she was available, and we started dating right away. So.
Wow, I love that. What a cool story. That's fantastic. You definitely have found your soulmate for sure. That's the
Oh, yeah.
circumstances of your meeting. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you guys got married and were done with school, did you immediately get into ranching? Like, what was the pathway to get to where you are today?
Sure. So before I met her, I think I met her when I was in my early 20s, 21, 22. And before I met her, I was trying really hard to find work in agriculture. And I think it was actually I think it was about the same time that I met her is when I got my first job on a ranch. It was up in Idaho. And so I worked for different ranches, a few different ranches up in Idaho after we got married. I worked with her family a little bit after or before we got married and after. And then after I graduated school, I got a degree in ag business management. And I worked for a local farm up in Idaho for a little while, and then came to Nevada for a cattle ranch opportunity, and then from there, her family is our neighbors out here. So before we got here, the guy that owns this land, he needed someone to help him. He had lost his hired guy, and he needed a hired man to help him run the place. And so my in-laws, they mentioned it to me and said, "Hey, you should come work with this guy." And so that's what brought us to this ranch specifically. It was work with him, and he was kind of ready to retire, ready to phase out, and so it worked out really well. Where eventually, after a few years of working with him, I was able to purchase the cattle from him, and then arrange a lease agreement for the land. And so that's where we've been for the past 2 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So you own the land outright at this point? Or it's
No,
leased?
we're leasing the land from him, and then we own the cattle herd. So.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. And how long ago was it that you first moved onto that property? Like, how long have you personally lived on that land?
Yeah, so it's been just about 6 years now.
Wow, that's amazing. So I lived in my house for 13 years, and you know Daybreak. Daybreak is amazing. Our neighborhood is absolutely awesome. Great lake, lots of different walking, places to walk and trails and things like that. And it's really great. And over the years, I've gotten to know the neighborhood quite a bit. But it really wasn't until the pandemic and us being placed on unemployment that I had enough time to really make sure that I get out and walk the neighborhood like every single day. So typically I don't do any less than about 10 miles in my neighborhood. And I've realized like for how much I love to see new places and travel to new areas and have new experiences, I've gotten to appreciate being on one space really intensely, a lot more intensely than I have in the past. And you get into like the cycle of what a normal day is like, what a year is like, where the animals are, where the robins go. I notice like flight patterns of different birds. It's
Yeah.
really pretty amazing to like relate closer to my landscape. And I would argue that you probably have that beat 100-fold for living as long as you have on one piece of land and being out there all the time. What has it been like for you to like really understand and appreciate the cycle of nature way more than most people could.
Yeah, it's been awesome. I grew up kind of transient. We moved to several different states and different towns, and so I never really stayed in one place very long, and I really wasn't aware of that kind of stuff as much until I was a late teenager either. But yeah, I've certainly noticed that here. Like one thing I've done since we got here was I've made notes about the weather. I have a day planner that I use to help me, stay organized, and I make notes about the weather. So I'll go back and look, in my past year's planners and say, so we got snow on this day last year, and I actually just looked at that last year. This last weekend we had snow here, uh,
Wow.
which was amazing. Now it's clear skies and 70 degrees, and
Wow.
uh, but it's been really neat to see that the weather, being able to watch that, and then just watch the cycle of the grasses, when it really starts to come up and get green, and when it starts to go dormant, and what it takes for each of those things to happen.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And I would be willing to bet if I took that notebook away from you, which is really smart, by the way, to do that. But if I took that away from you, I'll bet just based on feel, you would be able to feel out probably 95% of all this stuff that you're writing down at this point. I think it's so
I hope
cool.
so. I hope so.
That's amazing. Tell us about the property itself.
Yeah, so this is actually in a farm district, is what they call it, and what that is it was used to be desert land, and I believe in the 70s, some people came in and drilled wells, and started cultivating this desert ground, and it's at the bottom of a valley, and so that, I think that's where the aquifers are. The water under the ground is all here at the bottom of the valley. Um, but so anyway, so the property itself, I think, has been in production one way or another since the 70s. And when it got turned to pasture, I think was about 20 years ago now. The early part of the 2000s is when it turned to pasture. And it's been pasture, mostly pasture ever since then.
Okay, so I didn't know that. That's actually really important to point out as far as this discussion goes. You're saying that in 30 from the 70s to 2000, it was a desert transformed into good enough soil that we could grow stuff, and then now pasture where grasses is growing perennially.
Right. Yep. And I'm not sure of the crops they grew before, but I would imagine they did, cereal grains and probably alfalfa before, to start that process of changing.
Wow. But so cool to say that that can be done. We can transform the land and have it be more fertile. That's so interesting. I love that insight. So what what is the day in the life like for you? Is every day vastly different? This was really fun to talk to you about in person a few weeks ago. But tell the listeners, like, what is normal life for you like?
Sure. Yeah. Hopefully I can make it understandable. I think there are some things that happen every day. For example, I get into a routine, especially in the summertime, of moving the cows every day. We do rotational grazing, and so we have the cows on it's probably about an acre and a half to 2 acres, each day, and we move them to a new patch of grass each day. And so that includes putting up fence, taking down fence. It's just temporary fencing, so it's not like we're putting in T-posts and barbed wire every day. It's just poly wire, and like fiberglass posts that come in and out. So you do that, and then depending on where the cows are, I need to bring water to them sometimes. We have some plumbing that has permanent watering points, but not throughout the whole farm yet. So I've got to haul water to them. So that's usually something I started doing first thing in the morning, as I would go and make sure the water the irrigation water is still running. And then I'd build the fence, move the cows, move the water trough, and get all that going.
After watching the videos of you moving the cows, I understand why you do that early in the day. Those guys are chomping at the bit to get to their new area of food. They need no coaxing, I will say.
Yeah, it's actually been awesome because the normal way to move cows is from behind. Like if you need to drive them somewhere, you go from behind and you kind of push them, and that's how they've been conditioned, and that's probably the most common way to move them. And so what I've noticed with this is that if I get in front of them, they start following me around, and that it's actually really helpful. You can use that to your advantage. So I just go to where I want them to be, and I open the gate, and I start to walk through, and then they see it, and they make a beeline, and I don't have to
That's
get behind them
awesome.
at all. So
I
it's
love that.
really
Yeah,
cool.
watching that video was great. I love that. That's awesome. So you do have some day-to-day stuff that you have to keep up with, but I'm guessing the rest of the year would be really kind of hit and miss for different tasks and different things that you have to do. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely some seasonality, of course. During the spring and summer is when we try to do our calving. And so for me, I have a registered purebred herd. And so one of the things we have to do is take birth weights and different data from the calves within 24 hours of birth. That just helps us keep track of genetics and different things like that. And so that's a little bit of work in the spring and summer to do that. But that usually only lasts for a month or two. But then we've got to wean the calves at certain times a year, and we got to work them and give them shots and help them stay healthy, and so there's that kind of stuff in the summer and spring. And then like right now in the fall, I've just finished weaning, and so I'm separating groups out, and moving them to different places. Once our summer feed kind of slows down, I'm able to use the neighbors' fields for their crop aftermath, and so I can
nice.
move the cattle to different places in the valley.
Wow.
So that's what I've been working on this morning, is getting ready for all of that.
Yeah, nice. And you said it's always better for the cows to have kind of live plants versus like in the wintertime, it's not ideal for them to eat hay, for example.
Right. And hay is fine. You use it when you have to. But I think, even though the plants go dormant in the wintertime, I think it's always better just to have them on pasture. And what was I going to say about that? Oh, yeah. So one of the things we try to do is to line up their nutritional requirements with what's available in nature at that time. So that's why we try to calve in the spring and summer, because that's when they need the nutrition the most, and that's when the grass is doing the best.
Wow.
And so in the wintertime, when they're not as when they don't need as much nutrition, that's when they can be on dormant feed, grass that's kind of gone dormant for the winter, and they can survive on that pretty well.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell us about the cows themselves and what their uses are, because as I understand it, you weren't originally raising cattle for food. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So what this herd was doing before we bought it, they were selling breeding stock for other cattle producers. So we would sell bulls that people would take and put with their cows, to get calves. And then we would also sell females, so people could, replace some of the females that, that they would sell or get rid of. So genetics was the main focus, or the main product. And we're still trying to do that. That's still one of our enterprises, but I think it works and fits really well with going straight to beef as well.
Yeah. So what drove that decision?
I was trying to find different ways to make this work. this is all we want to do. We want to run cows. That's what we want our living to be. And so I was just looking for other ways to generate income off of that, and ways that would complement what we were doing. And we have been eating our beef for ever since we got here, really. I think the first year we were here, we were able to put one of the cows in our freezer, and we've loved it, and thought it's really good. And I think my parents, they may have had a good influence on me in that, because they were very complimentary of the beef that they tasted at our house. And so I thought, well, if city people think that this beef tastes good, then maybe we can make something out of that. So,
That's amazing. Oh, that's so cool. So just curious, for your family, one cow, how long would that last you?
yeah, it kind of depends, and we may not be the best example of that, because I can only eat beef and pork, and so I can't eat chicken. I have an allergy to chicken, and so we eat
Gotcha.
a lot of beef. And so what I say may not be typical for everyone, but for us, 2 adults and 4 kids, I think we can go through a whole beef in about 6 to 8 months.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
So maximum is 2 animals per year
right. Yeah.
to feed 2 ranchers and their 4 very active children.
Yeah, and that's almost. I don't think we don't eat beef for breakfast, but almost every other meal we usually have beef in. So
Yeah. Wow. And you also, I know you got into chickens not too long ago, so you have fresh eggs. And you also have one separate cow that is your dairy cow, right? For family use.
right, yep. So we've got one of our own who is hopefully bred, and she'll calve next summer and start giving milk. And then my brother-in-law and his wife, they have a milking cow right now that they let us share milk with.
Wow. That's great. It seemed like it was more cream than like milk.
It's awesome. She's a Jersey breed, and so they're known for having more cream. And I think if you had like a gallon jar, I would say that the top third of that jar, once it settles, the top third of that jar is cream.
Top third. That's amazing. Do you make butter out of it ever?
I haven't. My wife has done that, and I don't know. It's different than what you get at the store, because the whey comes out, I guess, and it makes it kind of liquid on the top of the butter. I don't know if you've ever seen that or
No, I
heard of
haven't.
that, but
Interesting.
it's good butter though. We like it.
Wow, that's great. What is a typical life cycle of a cow that is being raised for meat?
Yeah. So do you mean here on this farm or in another place?
Yeah, I mean, let's keep it to this farm since you work the land and you know it the best.
Sure. Okay. Um, so um, I mean, we could start as early as a genetic planning. So because what I do, uh, well, one of the things I do to get my cows bred is I use artificial insemination, and so I take the genetic information from my cow herd, and then I look at the bulls that are available to use, and I try to make the best mating from that, before you know, before we even get started. And so that'd be the first thing probably, the planning to get them bred, and then I go through some protocols to make that happen, and then yeah, and then so after that, uh, they get pregnant, and it takes about 9 months. There's a little variation, just like in people, but it's 9 months, to gestate, and then they calve, and they stay with their mothers for about 6 to 7 months, somewhere around there, nursing, and then at that point, we'll take them off of their mothers. And one of the reasons we do that is because they start to get big enough that it'll really suck down, the health of the mother. They
Oh,
can get thin. They can, lose body condition, and
hmm,
it can be hard on them. And so that's one of the reasons we do that. I don't know, some people feel like that's cruel, but I think that's just a normal part of husbandry that
Sure.
needs to happen. But anyways, so they get weaned at anywhere from 6 to 8 months, let's say, and then um, we usually keep them away from their mothers for 45 days or so, and then we put them back in the herd so that we can manage everything together. And then from that point on, really they just stay with the cows. They stay grazing, and probably about a year or so goes by before they're ready to be harvested for meat.
Yeah, gotcha. And is there advantages or disadvantages to either going for a shorter life or for a longer life?
Um, let's see. I've heard different theories about all these, and I guess I'm sure there's merit to all of them in their own regard. But it seems like animals um, that are still growing, they usually have better flavor and better tenderness than an animal that's stopped growing. And it can be debatable about when they stop growing, but it could be up to 4 years old, I would say, in some animals, is when they stop completely growing. And for us, most of the calves that are born for beef, they'll be finished by then. They'll be harvested and and made into the beef by then. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So somewhere in like the 2 to 3 kind of year mark.
right, yep.
Yeah. How do you guys handle the harvesting of the meat where you are? It seems, I don't know, maybe I don't know if it's unique or not. Is it something that only you guys do, or do lots of ranches harvest the cows the way that you do?
I'm not sure. It seems like most people, they will send them to a facility. Um, if they want them to get harvest, they'll send them to a facility in town. And so that's obviously different than what we do. Um, and what we do is we have our friend that that's his job. He's a butcher, and he comes out to our place, and he has equipment that he brings with him. All right, is that any better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Totally better. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I'll go back and I'll edit that, but I'm going to ask, I'll just ask the question one more time.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about the harvesting process itself. How do you guys end up harvesting the cattle? It sounds like you guys do it in a really unique way.
Yeah. So and I'm actually pretty proud of the way we do this. And I was telling my wife last night how it really feels good because we have a hand in these cows' lives from the beginning, even before they're conceived, to the end, until how they're used. And I feel really good about that because I feel like I have control over how all of that happens, and so I can ensure that it happens in a responsible way, in a way that makes me feel good, in a way that I think can make the cows feel good too, and not have stress. And so we have our friend who does the processing and harvesting for us, and so he comes to our farm, and I'll bring the cows right off of the pasture into a little holding pen, and and he'll harvest them right there. And he brings equipment with him. He has a refrigeration unit trailer that he brings, and so he'll quarter the animal and put it in that refrigeration unit, and then he'll transport it back to his facility, where he then will process it into the different cuts and that type of thing.
Yeah, wow. So the cows literally are born, they live, and they're harvested all in the same place. They never leave the property.
Right. Yeah. Or the valley. I mean, we go, like I mentioned earlier, we do go to some other places to graze, but they're right here. They're neighbors. It's
Yeah, little field
yeah.
trips,
Right.
literally.
Yeah.
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 Wow. Okay. Uh, and I'm sure you get a really good sense of this. What while the cow is alive, what is the quality of life?
Yeah. So I always tell people that this is heaven for cows. This is the best life they could have. And just across the fence line, we have desert, and there's range cows there. and they have a little bit harder. They have to work a little harder, walk a little farther to water, and all those things, and that's fine too. I think cows are adaptable. They're built for that, but like our cows have a pretty cush life. Every day they get fresh feed, they get fresh water, they get to move every day, and they're hardly ever in a place that doesn't have grass or some kind of ground cover, and so it's, I don't know, I can't imagine any other way that that could be better, honestly.
Wow, that's amazing. And for the cows that are further out, other people that use those other rangelands, is predation a concern? Like, do cows have natural predators the closer they get to, say, like the mountains or something?
That's debatable. I think there's some problems with like coyotes preying on calves, newborn calves, and mostly I think that's from calves that aren't able to get up quick enough, or their mothers don't pay good enough attention to them, things like that. But really, there's not a whole lot of predation, at least here, in our valley, in our area, that I'm aware of. I would say
Wow.
coyotes are maybe some of that, or maybe crows.
Wow.
But other than that, not a whole
Interesting.
lot.
And I've just heard that coyotes themselves are like master hunters. They really know what they're doing, and it can multiply really quickly, I think.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And it's actually really neat because in our pastures, we have coyotes, and we don't shoot them. But what we see is the coyotes, they'll be, meandering through the cows, and what they're doing is they're getting meadow voles and mice and gophers and squirrels, and they don't pay any attention to the cows.
Wow.
And if they get too close, the cows will run them off, but they coexist pretty well. They're doing two different things, and they don't need to bother each other.
Wow. Wow. Maybe this is a good time to ask the question. Like, you must witness this all the time. The nature, the relationship of plants and animals, and how everything works together. I thought the documentary, the biggest little farm, did a really good job kind of showing farm life. And obviously they started out with a lot of money, and there was a little bit of criticism there, but they took dead land and within a few years diversified it and made it into this amazing farm with all of these different species of animals and plants. And you really got the sense of like, all of this is so important for this system to work. You need all of it. Can you comment a little bit about what you've observed as far as that goes?
Yeah. Um, there's so much with that, but I think hopefully this will tie into that. But one thing that I've noticed, really, and has really hit home in the past year or two, is that what we see is just a small part of what's actually going on. And so I think my traditional mindset when I first started working with cows, the first thing that I tried to manage for was the cows, how they were doing, and then after a little while, I started to realize, well, the pasture is what, supports them. And so I need to worry about the pasture a little bit. And those are both visual things that you see every day. And what I've come to learn, and I'm coming to learn, is that even there's more beyond that, even below the pasture in the soil. And I don't see that every day. And so if we're not being intentional about caring for that, it can go by the wayside because we're worried about what we can see. We're worried about the cows and the grass, and we forget about what's supporting all of that. And so
That's incredible.
yeah, so I don't know if that ties into that or not, but that's what
Absolutely.
came to mind.
Wow. No, absolutely. That's amazing. It would be so obvious for somebody like me who doesn't have a background in this to show up and think that exact same way. Like, let's take care of the cows. And it's like, the cows will take care of themselves. The grasses will take care of themselves. All of the plants, animals will be fine as long as the foundation, the most important thing, the soil, is taken care of. I think that's super profound. I really appreciate that answer. Wow. That's amazing. One of the things I also saw in that documentary was how that couple used natural kind of problem solving solutions to fix other issues. And again, everything seemed to benefit when they did. And so, like, an example that's coming to mind is I remember they were infested with slugs or snails or something that they couldn't get rid of. And they could like try to pick them off, but they'd obviously come right back until they learned like ducks love these things. Let's put the ducks in this area. They consumed all the snails, and all of a sudden you fed all your ducks, they're fertilizing the land, and now there's no more snails. Like, you just solved all those problems. Can you think of like a specific example that you had to do something similar to that, where a natural solution kind of fixed everything?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I think it was our first year on the lease, and what we had was we had a huge. I don't want to call it an infestation, but we had a huge influx of clover, white clover, and white clover is good, but it you got to kind of be careful with it because it can cause bloat in the cattle if they eat too much of it. And so, so I had one part of the pasture that was just overtaken with clover. And in the past, the way that had been managed was that he would spray it out and kill it. And there was a lot of reasons why I didn't want to do that. And one of them was that I couldn't afford it because it was my first year, and I had no money. I put everything into getting started. And so I was, thinking, what can I do with this? And I thought, I can't spray it. I thought maybe I could borrow a tractor from the neighbors and cut it, so that when you cut it, it'll take away some of that bloat capacity. So I thought maybe I could cut it. And then I remembered something that I'd been telling people before, that I want to use my cows as the tractors. And because they don't run on diesel fuel, they work for me. And so I thought, I think it's time to put my money where my mouth is, and really try to make that work, turn those cows into tractors. And so instead of cutting the field, or instead of spraying it out or any of those things, I decided I'm just gonna start putting the cows on there in little paddocks, is what we call them, these little spaces, because that way they can get enough of other plants in there, and not have anything else to get caught up on, because what a cow does when they run in, they kind of go wild. It's a feeding frenzy. They'll just eat whatever they can. And so if you have them in a small space like that, there's no way that they can eat enough clover to die. And so I thought, well, that's what I got to do. And so I got all my fencing stuff squared away, and we just started grazing it. And I can't remember the size of the paddocks that we grazed, but I think I started really small because I was nervous. I didn't want them to be able to overeat. And then we slowly got bigger and bigger till I think we were about at 2-acre paddocks. And we grazed that whole field and have never looked back. And
That's amazing.
been grazing that way ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. And I've heard, maybe you can confirm this, I've heard that cows will choose different grasses, presumably because they know what is missing in their nutrition. And so they know that if they get a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that combines for a better nutrition. Is that something you've noticed?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. What I've noticed is the cows go for what they like the most. And we call those ice cream plants. And so that's one of the problems when you have continuous grazing, we call it, when they just have a big area that they can freely choose, is they'll just go after those plants over and over and over, and
Gotcha.
they'll never get a chance to recover. And there will be a perfectly good plant right next to them that they never even look at, because they can keep going around to those ice cream plants over and over.
Wow.
And so when you sequester them into a smaller location for that short time, then they eat everything.
Wow.
And so I think maybe that's like us. If we ate ice cream all the time, probably wouldn't be good. But if we have a good variety, maybe that's better for us, and I think it's better for them too.
Yeah, funny. I was just thinking, like, I'm on a carnivore diet, so I don't need any plants. But now I know that there's an ice cream plant. I might start. I might start with that. That sounds good.
There you go. Yeah, try
Yeah.
that white clover. So that's
Awesome,
one of the ice
delicious
cream
ice cream
plants.
plants. That's hilarious. I want to make sure that we don't miss this, and I want to make sure that we do this in a respectful manner. But let's talk about the death of the animal, going back to the life cycle and the death cycle. How physically how is the animal harvested?
Yeah, so our friend that comes and does that, he has a firearm that he uses, and it's specially made for doing this. And so, and he's really good. He's been doing this for 30 years, and so
Wow.
he's extremely capable at at doing it. And so, really, the cow, 1 second they're there, and he's good enough that all it takes is one shot, and it's it's finished. And that's something that's really important to us too, for a lot of different reasons. But we care about our cows. We don't want to see them suffer. And if you're not concise and quick with the harvest, that there's no excuse for that, in my opinion. And so it's important to us that he knows what he's doing. He does it quick. It's there's no pain. It's over.
Painless.
You
Yeah.
know. So
Wow. Is there any I mean, I've heard you guys describe this. Like, you know your cows. Like, to say that you know your cows, like you have names for your cows, like you know their personalities, and they sound to me like pets, frankly. And so, is there any kind of like trauma, or is it difficult on those days, or is it just kind of accepted that this is part of the life cycle?
sure. Yeah, I think for me, I handle a little better than my wife does. And I guess that's a little ironic because I'm the one that's there. She stays home on those days. She doesn't want to, see any of that or be a part of that. But for me, it feels it actually, and I think I can speak for her in this too. It feels better knowing that we're the ones doing it,
Yeah.
and that we have control over that, and how that's done. Because otherwise, if we take a cow to a sale barn or somewhere else, we don't know, what's going to happen. And so there's a little bit of comfort in that, that yes, this is not something that's glorious that happens, but it is a part of the process. Um, when it's done correctly, I think we can be proud of it and be happy with how it's happened.
Yeah. It's very respectfully done, and I can tell it's done with a lot of intention for sure. So the cow then gets quartered and taken away and is processed into, I would assume a lot of different things. Are there parts of the cows that are not used?
Yeah, and that's something we're trying to prevent. And I think that's one thing that the conventional beef supply chain does really well is they hardly have any waste. They find a use for everything, for hides, for hooves, all that. And with us, we don't really have any. We haven't found any place to go with a lot of that stuff. And so I keep organs, and I keep as much of the stuff that can be eaten as possible. But a lot of it, unfortunately, it goes into a pit, and even the hides, which is a shame. But I just, we're at the point that we're at right now. We don't have any outlets for any of that kind of stuff.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I would feel the same way. It's a shame that it's going to waste, but if there's not a use for it, that doesn't sound like a waste to me. It's going back into the earth. That's going to
Sure.
provide the nitrogen that we need. And so that I don't see that wasted. It'd be cool if you could make a sweet coat out of it or something. But yeah, you're right. Like that at the very least, it's going back into the earth and is going to be returned in the form of nutrients that come up in those grasses.
Right. No, that's a good. I like that. That sounds better. That feels better.
Yeah, good. I definitely don't see it as any kind of a waste. And you choose to do a lot of your beef as ground beef. Personally, I love that decision. I think that's great because it's very versatile. You can make ground beef into anything. Is there advantages or disadvantages to, say, selling ribeyes in New York, some porterhouses, and all those types of cuts that you do a more limited amount of versus kind of putting it all together and having it as ground beef?
Yeah. So the reason we did that originally was because that's how we wanted our beef. My wife feels like it's extremely versatile. trying to feed 4 kids, I don't know, steaks every night, probably not going to work. Kids are still getting their teeth, and you know, it's not as enjoyable for them. My oldest daughter, though, she does love steak. So
Nice.
when she gets a chance, she likes a good steak. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, so that was originally why we did it, because like you said, it was versatile. You can lots of different use it in lots of different things.
Yeah.
And on the other end of that too, on the cattle side, you can use a lot of different kind of cows to make that ground beef. I don't know if that makes sense, but compared to the cuts, for cuts to be made, you really need a young animal that's still growing, and so you're a little more limited on your selection there.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you're doing it in a ground beef, you don't have to worry about tenderness or marbling or any of that with the ground beef, and so you have more options that way.
Yeah, interesting. And when I talked to you, you said as of now you're just doing ground beef. I have observed definitely a market for people that are requesting ground beef with a little bit of those organs mixed in particular the liver. Do you think that might ever be something you would try?
Like to market a mix like that, you mean? Or
Yeah, like a mix of like this is 95% ground beef with 5% beef
uh,
liver mixed in to kind of hide the taste. I know a lot of people in the carnivore community specifically that are trying to get more organs in their diet, but they might be
uh,
like me where like they don't have the taste for it. They can't just cook up liver and have that taste good. And so
sure.
finding ways to get that kind of nutrition into people is sometimes kind of requested. And I see a market for that in ground beef. Is that something you would consider?
Yeah, I had never thought of that before, but that's certainly something I'd be willing to explore.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so grass fed, grass finished versus conventional. Let's just go now to like the eating of it. First of all, I would say the flavor of your ground beef is so good. It is so good. Last night, I was just telling you, last night I made four about a third of a pound burger patties. I snarfed it right up. They were absolutely delicious with a minimal amount of seasoning, a little bit of salt. They were so good. My only experience with grass fed, I presume to be grass finished, which is questionable, beef is either that it's super expensive. Um, I've had I've had some cuts of ground beef that I could not eat for taste. They just did not taste very good. Or like the stuff that I get at the store, I just don't notice any difference besides it's costing me double. It looks the same, it feels the same, it tastes the same. So oftentimes in the past, what I've done is if I wanted, you know, ground beef, I just buy conventional ground beef because I could because of those limiting factors. What would you say specifically about like the taste and the nutrition of grass-fed beef versus conventional beef?
Yeah, um, I don't know, when we harvested our first cow here, I definitely could tell a difference. Um, and because up to that point we had just eaten conventional beef, and so I could definitely tell a difference. Now, well, I guess that from that time until about a month ago, I really couldn't tell much of a difference until we went to a restaurant. Uh, I forget when that was, a month ago, I think. And I had a burger, and it tasted fine, but the beef, it didn't taste like anything. It was hot and it had a bunch of fixings on it, but it tasted flavorless almost.
Wow.
And that's the first time that I've really noticed that. Um, and so I don't know what it is. I don't know, what makes that difference, but I could definitely tell that there was something different between that burger I had there and the burger I make at home.
Wow. I would say just visually too, like looking at the meat that's coming from your packages, it it's not it's not purple. It's just this like different, richer color
Mm.
of red with like the contrasting like flecks of fat in there. It looks I've never seen beef that looks like that. It looks literally like more rich.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, in fact, I went to visit our friend that does the processing when he was working on some of those, and I walked in, when he was grinding up some of that hamburger, and it was beautiful. I
It's
mean, that
beautiful.
that may sound like a overstatement, but when I looked at it, the color, it was like you said, it was a rich, full color. and the contrast with the white, it made me hungry. I thought, man, that looks really good. And I asked him, I said, is that from one of our cows? And he said, yeah, that was the one we just did. And and it looked great, better than anything I've seen in the store.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so for somebody who is city bound, maybe they're on a budget, they can't do what I did and buy a quarter cow.
Sure.
So what would you tell to that person based on your understanding of just being around this stuff? I know you're not like an expert in nutrition per se, but I think you know a lot more than most people since you're around it so much. Would you tell them that, like, if that was their only option, conventional eggs, conventional meat, that kind of thing, should that kind of thing be consumed in your opinion? Or is it something that, like, if you can't do grass fed, grass finished, you probably should avoid it to begin with?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I don't really know for sure. I mean, I've been at the point where I had to do what I had to do, to put food on my table. So I don't fault anybody for you know for doing what they have to do to fill their bellies. But I think if you have the options, I think the best food you can get, is what you ought to be doing.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's very fair. That's the way I would have answered that question. What I recommend to my people as well is do the best you can. That doesn't mean that you can't sometimes go get a rotisserie chicken for $5 if that's the best you can do. It's not optimal, but it's at least something. And I still think, like, a few conventional eggs and a pound of ground beef is like probably the best nutrition that you can get of any kind. It's going to be better than if you're avoiding that kind of thing and having a bunch of processed crap. All the stuff that we find in the middle of the grocery store becomes your only option then. And it's like, yeah, like, not ideal, but maybe you should have just got some more basic eggs and just cook those up and have that be your nutrition for the day. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that answer.
yeah. Well, and when I was single and living on my own, that's what I ate a lot of, was eggs, because
Nice.
it had protein. It filled my belly. I didn't feel too hungry afterwards, and you could go a long ways with some eggs. So
Yeah. Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome. Okay. I know you're not a nutrition expert. You got a front row seat. You told me that you guys consume massive amounts of beef and pork. You eat lots of eggs, mostly animal products with high fat, high cholesterol. You're raising your kids this way. They're drinking cream, essentially. What do you observe in your family as far as health goes? Are you worried that your little kids are going to start blowing up with heart disease all of a sudden? Or, like, what are you observing in yourself and those around you?
Sure. Yeah, and there's probably two components to that. They say there's nutrition and then your lifestyle. And I think you could probably eat all the right foods, but if you just sit at home all day, you probably still won't be that healthy, and maybe vice versa.
Yeah,
Um,
good point.
and so, and I don't know, maybe that's not completely true, but what I've noticed is that my kids are active. We open the door in the morning and we turn them out, for lack of a better word, and they run all day. They make me tired just looking at them. And so they're active. They're doing stuff. They're using their mind. They're using their heart. They come in out of breath. They're very active. And so, um, yeah, I think, I don't worry about their health. I feel like they're very healthy kids. They rarely get sick. And if we have the occasional cold, they have a stuffy nose for a week or so. I can't remember the last time any of them have gotten sick, with the
Wow.
flu, or where they're bedridden, or they can't get out of bed or anything like that. I don't worry about that at all for them. I feel like they're active. They eat food. They're good. So
That's amazing. Wow. Okay. I'm going to share with you my observation of your kids. I got to meet them as
sure.
well as they were all in town. I actually got to
Yeah.
meet them twice because the next day when we went to pick up the beef,
Oh,
yeah, they were around. So it was cool. I got to observe them 2 different days, 2 different times a day. I rode my
nice.
bike from my house up to your mom's house. They were all at the park and they were playing, and they were very active. But how do I describe it? They weren't like chaotic. They were just like energetic. And they saw me, and I saw these kids. I didn't know who they were, and I saw these kids playing on the swing set, and I waved to them, and they waved back, and, like, they were observant. They acknowledged me. They were very polite. It came to be that I went into the house, and all the kiddos came in as well, and they were calm. they were just calm. I don't know how else to say it. They were extremely observant. One of them asked for milk, and I think, grandma poured them all like half and half cream, which I was like, that's awesome, that's amazing. And they didn't, like, they talked and they had conversations, but their temperament was, yeah, like energetic, but very calm. And I don't see a lot of that around me. Like, even for a kid to wave back at me, I don't see a lot of these days. A lot of kids will like not look at you or turn away, or they'll be like either hyperactive or throwing a tantrum. And that was just something that I didn't observe whatsoever. I'm sure they blow up on certain moments, but that for me was really interesting to see.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that observation, and I don't know if this makes any difference, but we don't do video games or iPads or anything like that. They don't have any of that kind of screen time. We watch movies at night, but that's really the only time they're looking at a screen. And so I feel like that's the way that me and you probably grew up. In that generation, we didn't have iPads and all that stuff, and I feel like that helps you develop your mind and helps you be a well-rounded person.
Yeah, the pictures, I told you, the pictures are just amazing. And I commented this to you a few weeks ago. There's a longing. You see that and you're just like, man, I kind of want that life. It looks so cool. And like the kids are playing around in the water troughs as the cows are drinking, and there's a calf in your bathroom in the wintertime that need to be taken care of. And like they're with the animals, and they're with the grasses, and they seem like they had so much innate like wisdom that they were tapping into, that again I don't see a lot of. I thought it was super cool. I thought it was very, very cool observation.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I want to conclude this conversation by asking you three different questions in three different ways. And I do this again just based on observation. You have a front row seat to all of this stuff. And
Sure.
and I don't think you need to be an expert per se in any of these fields. And in fact, I think you have an advantage, again, being front row for these things. You don't have anything to gain or lose by talking about some of these things. So the first question is, in your opinion, kind of like we talked about, as far as health goes, eating animal products, what would you want the average person to know about consuming what most people would consider massive amounts of beef and eggs and cream and all the stuff that people have been told not to eat for 70 years?
Yeah. Good question. I don't know. I feel like animals were created for a purpose, and part of that purpose is to give us nutrition, and to give us nourishment. And so I guess I feel like if we're not doing that, then we're wasting a resource that's been given to us specifically for our benefit.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. Thank you. Look, well, let's talk ethics now. What would you want the average person to know about the ethical consideration of consuming animals? People that say, like, I choose not to eat any animals or animal products because I can't stand the thought of an animal losing their life.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe it's the same kind of answer to that, but um, I don't know if you. I guess maybe to ask a question, what is more inhumane, or what is more terrible, for something to waste away and die normally, or for it to be uh, or for it to be harvested and used in a way that's beneficial to everyone. Um, I think I guess I don't know what people think, but are you just going to turn a cow out and you know out into the desert and let them live a life, and never use them for anything? That doesn't seem very what's the word? That doesn't seem like a good thing to me, and I don't think a cow would have a good life that way either.
Yeah.
I feel like it's that's what they're made for. That's one of the things they're made for. I don't think that's all they're made for, but I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things they're made for, and they're really good at giving us nutrition and giving us what we need.
Mm.
Uh, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Cows to me appear very social, and I think about that one cow isolated in the middle of nowhere. Like, what chance does that cow have to survive? He's sitting prey. He's going to have a death, and I would argue that death would be far worse than something that's really instantaneous. Having a little bit of a background in, um, I guess like monocropping, something that we mentioned in the introduction. Can you comment on the true story of how destructive and how much death is involved in monocropping?
Mm. Yeah, and it's hard to have a blanket statement. There's different people that really try to be conscientious, and then there's people that don't, and then there's everyone in between. But the potential um, that monocropping has, for death and for that kind of negativity, I think is pretty high. Um, you know, I guess I don't know. For example, if you have one field, a crop field, you're trying to grow a certain crop, anything that's not that crop, the alternative is to kill it. So if it's they call it a weed, but maybe it's beneficial. So like for example, let's say we're trying to grow a field of alfalfa, and you have some orchard grass that comes up in that field. If you are only focusing on the alfalfa, then you've got to kill that orchard grass. And what that does uh, is it interrupts the soil cycle. When you kill something that way and put a synthetic pesticide on there, it can interrupt the microbiology in the soil, and so it kills some of those microbes. And then let's say that orchard grass goes away, then something's got to come in to fill the space that orchard grass was in, and it'd be another weed. They would call it a weed, and then that's something that they don't want, so they got to kill that too. And it's a perpetual cycle that just keeps going on and on.
Yeah, no, that's really well explained. And I also think about, harvesting the crops. There's an enormous amount of death done to animals during that process. I've heard that it can be rather traumatic to drive some of those combines, especially as you're harvesting through the final acres where all of these animals are condensing. And it can be a really difficult experience to see a lot of death of the animals and the critters that you mentioned that are kind of running around in the grasses all the time. Um, and
Sure.
I think about those scenarios, and I go back to thinking that you can either choose the monocropping and destroying different plants and probably lots of chemicals and dealing with annual plants that aren't developing deep roots that's depleting the soil, versus a system like you have, which is you have cows that live cow heaven lives. They have one bad day, one bad moment, and that's it. And two animals that have been alive and around and had a great life are now providing you and your entire family food for a year. Like, and so I balance those things. And it's not to say that none of us has doesn't have any blood on our hands. We all do. And I think that's the important thing to think about is all of us are part of this. If something is going to live, we're going to have to die, and we have to grapple with the ethics of that.
Sure. No, I agree. And like I mentioned previously, I feel good about what we're doing because we have a hand in everything from before birth until after they're harvested and processed. And so I feel comfortable, with everything we do. And, I don't feel any guilt, any shame, any of that. I feel like everything we're doing is good, and it's responsible. And I feel like we're being sensitive, to that animal, and to the different, uh, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I love that answer. And I'm glad that you take such pride in what you guys are doing, which is such great work. The third and final question that I'll ask you about that is you must like live in the epicenter of the destruction of the planet. You've got 150 cows around you all the time. So the argument is that cows are producing methane from farts, and that is destroying the planet. And again, how that works in the atmosphere, I don't exactly know, but surely you being in this area for so long with all these cows destroying the planet, you must get some sense of what is happening ecologically, what is happening to the health of the planet. So my third and final question for you is, as an observant, what would you want the average person to know about raising cattle and planetary health?
Yeah. So in all the years I've been around cows, I could probably count on two hands the number of times I've heard flatulation. Um, and so I don't know, take that for what that's worth, but I don't, and I'm around cows all the time here. So
Right.
I don't know if that means that they just don't do it in our environment, or maybe there's something else, but I don't hear that very often at all. So this, so that, I'd say that would be one thing. The second thing, every time we go to town, or to a big place, like Salt Lake, or, any other big population, it definitely feels different to me, to see all that asphalt and concrete, and I'm really happy to get back to our home, with grass and sunshine and clean air. And so I feel like it's a clean way to live, and I feel like we're benefiting uh, the planet, and population is necessary. Having cities, and I think that's probably a necessary thing. But I feel like with what we're doing, I think we're adding to the health of the ecosystem, adding to the health of the soil, and to the planet. Whereas some other ventures may not be doing that same thing.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I really appreciate those thoughtful answers. And that's certainly been my observation, and talking to a lot of people that are in this world has been eye-opening. And it's such a different narrative than what you hear like on the news and certain, social media, and, the plant-based movement that's really being pushed right now. It's just not something I've personally observed. The headlines look really scary, but when you go out and talk to these people, it's very, very different. So I really appreciate all of your insight. This has been such an amazing conversation. I just have to say that, like, whenever the next pandemic is, or when it looks like the world is losing their minds, I'm going to jump in my car with my wife, and we might like build a little shack on the corner of your property and just kind of hang out and hopefully work for a few pounds of ground beef every single day.
There you go.
Brennan, Brennan, this has been an awesome conversation. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and the work that you guys are doing on the farm?
So we have social media under HTTL Farms. We have Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And we've also got a website, httl.farms.myshopify.com.
Awesome. We will link to all of that in the show notes. What is your availability for people to purchase beef from you? Do they need to be local in this area? Is it better to kind of coordinate through you through the website, or can people directly order?
So people can directly order, and a lot of times that's more helpful because you avoid, the card processing fees and all that kind of thing. But whatever's easiest, people can order online, or direct messaging, and work it out that way. And I will say we only are currently delivering beef to Utah and to Nevada. Those are the only two states that we're operating in.
Gotcha. Wow. That's fantastic. I'm very fortunate that I live so close and was able to meet you in person and get to know you and your family, and learn about really ethical and amazing animal agriculture that produces food that feeds me and my family and tastes amazing and is doing something that's good for the environment at the same time. So, Brendan, thank you so very much for taking the time to do this, and thank you for your work in ranching. We really, really appreciate you.
No, thank you. I appreciate the support and all the encouragement, and it's been great to visit, and hopefully all the stuff I said made sense. So,
Yeah, it definitely did. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
awesome.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.